Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Reporting and Data Collection. Thank you for joining us today to really discuss the importance of collecting accurate data and information, determining why you need that information and how you will use it, but also learning more about what CNCS does with the data it collects. It's not just about completing reports, as much as the data can help your VISTA project and your organization measure its performance and determine success. Today you will hear from two CNCS staff members throughout the presentation. My name is Eric Powell, and I'm an AmeriCorps VISTA training specialist at the Corporation for National and Community Service, based in Washington, D.C., and I very happily served as a VISTA member with Rhode Island Campus Compact in 2006 and a VISTA leader with Illinois Campus Compact in 2008, and had a lot of activities related to assisting in data collection after my service year as I was a program coordinator. Today, I'll be hosting and presenting on today's webinar, as well as facilitating the chat activities throughout the webinar and the live Q&A at the end of the session.
And hi, everybody. I'm Brian Mitterer, and I'm the AmeriCorps VISTA Data Analyst, also at the Corporation for National and Community Service in Washington, D.C. And so data is very much a regular part of my everyday job. Before working at CNCS, my national service experience was that I served in the Peace Corps in Mozambique from 2013 to 2015 as a teacher at an engineering college. And so that's my picture up there next to Eric. And I was gonna comment that it really looks like the two of us are holding hands in our pictures when you put them together. There it is, together. Yeah. A picture from the before times, how we miss it. Also joining us today are Mike and Kim from our partners at LSI, who will be managing the Zoom webinar technology. You will also see them in the chat panel posting some links and questions, as well as assisting with various aspects of the webinar.
We have a lot to cover today in a short period of time, so our goals today include that we hope that you will be able to reflect on the importance of collecting accurate data, learn and develop ways to make use of the data that you collect, as I'm sure you are already doing. Also, we want you to understand the differences between and the information that we collect in the CNCS reports that are required for VISTA projects. And in looking at today's agenda, we're going to discuss data collection and why it's so important. We'll talk about why we even collect data, because there's obviously a reason. We'll provide a couple of examples of collecting data that may help you in your VISTA project. Then we'll segue into talking about reports, what goes into them. We'll talk about the differences between the CNCS reports, and we'll end with showing you some resources, giving you next steps and an evaluation to fill out, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. Let's face it, we all collect data, whether formally or informally, whether using a specific method or randomly. We have and we receive data based on our work. So let's talk about it.
Imagine the power in knowing where the patrons of your food bank live and how far they travel to your food bank. Imagine all the ways you could use such knowledge to better combat hunger in your community and in your state. It would be a game changer in helping to decide where you might establish a branch food pantry or a mobile food pantry. It might point you to offering bus passes as a low-cost means to removing a large barrier to food security for some of your patrons. Or imagine, as an ex-offender reentry support program, the power in knowing when your clients are most likely to reoffend. That kind of knowledge is worth building an entire program around from the base up. Data pertaining to the work you do can range from interesting but not particularly actionable to so important that you almost have a moral imperative to collect and make use of it. Data can be something your organization collects through its administrative processes, through intake forms or with a survey, or by some other mechanism. Data can be something you pull in from external sources to help you make sense of your business, like median housing costs in a particular zip code. It can be quantitative, hard numbers, percentages, mean, median, and mode. Or it can be qualitative, taking the form of stories, of open-ended responses, of people's observations. It can be ironclad in its accuracy, such as a click-through rate to your website, or it can be riddled with errors, such as a written log maintained by a rotating schedule of volunteers and then transcribed into a spreadsheet on a monthly basis. Oftentimes, you have many of these different types of data and can use them to your advantage. To do what? In the chat panel, at this time, type your answer to the following question. How do you use data in your VISTA project? Please be specific because you are also sharing your knowledge with others on this webinar and may help other VISTA projects think of new ways they can make use of their data. This is just one framework for thinking about it, but I like to think of the power of data collection, organization, and analytics as falling into one of three categories. Categories that we as organizations are basically always desperate to get better at. 1, supercharging operations. 2, informing strategy. And 3, telling our story. In the next couple of slides, we're going to look briefly at each of these with some examples. While we're doing that, and as they come to mind, type in the ways that your VISTA project uses or has used data to make things better. And let's see, Eric, do we have some responses coming into the chat?
We have a lot of responses, and just really quickly, a lot of people are using data to collect information on recruitment and figure out how to expand it. They use data to write grants, to update VISTA assignment descriptions, learning how to impact and educate and train their VISTA members based on the information they're providing. And 2 more I'll read. One of them uses data to evaluate program success and plan for future project grant applications. And then there's quite a few other people that use data to figure out what funding they have and how they can best use their VISTA member and VISTA leaders to access grant funds. So a lot of great ideas coming in.
Wonderful, thanks for that. Yeah, it's great to see the enthusiasm, and I really liked one item you just mentioned, and I saw earlier as well, using data to track your progress against specific goals. It's really just such a great thing. So we're going to move ahead to the next slide and talk about specifically about how data can help us supercharge operations. So of the 3 categories, this one really has a special place in my heart because it's such a guaranteed payoff. If you've ever recently stepped foot in an organization still operating a bit like it's 1995, you've seen many ways in which an embrace of technology and more modern workflows could radically improve efficiency and effectiveness. But honestly, many of us still work at a place operating still a bit like it's 2010, and the opportunities to make things better are still all over the place. If someone routinely needs information from multiple places brought together in order for them to do their job, an all-in-one place data report could save them boatloads of time. If 2 separate contact lists tracking different information need to be merged together, a tedious manual process can be replaced with Excel formulas. A look at your organization's financial data from the last couple of years can replace this year's budget guesswork with better informed guesses based on data. The best part about using data and informational tools to streamline operations is that it frees us from a degree of tedium and uncertainty so that we can spend more time focusing on the urgent questions of how to best serve those in need in our communities. This work is capacity building, and many successful VISTA projects engage their VISTA members in data collection, management, and analytics to strengthen operations. When partnered with a commitment to a strong mission, data has the power to help answer the big picture questions that can profoundly affect the direction and impact of your organization. These questions tend to be harder, but not always. Here are some examples of big questions that we at CNCS have recently tackled or tackled some version of to keep us working towards a better program. Do support grant funds correlate with better attrition and levels of VISTA member satisfaction? Are VISTAs serving where the need is greatest? What would it cost to increase the minimum living allowance to $20,000 a year? And with flat funding, how many fewer VISTAs would that mean having nationally?
Well, one way to supercharge your operations and inform your strategy is really by telling your story. Keep in mind that these 3 ideas do not have to follow a linear path because one may inform the other. You know as much as we do just how powerful storytelling is. Many of you mentioned already in the chat about how data helps tell your story and get the information out there. When people hear about the impact of your work, when applicants hear about what your VISTA members do, when board members and constituents can tell the story of how people's lives have changed because of your VISTA project. Data help you to tell the story with real, concrete, factual information. And don't forget about asking VISTAs that are near their end of their service and their VISTA alumni to tell their story, since 79% of alumni are or plan to become actively involved in their community post-service, compared to 47% prior. No matter to whom you are telling your story, combining quantitative data with an emotional hook and some qualitative data is powerful. And also, don't forget the varied impact that quotes can make, especially from people in the community. For example, a VISTA member commented, "The takeaway from my experience is simple yet profound. We can still give to others even if we have nothing for ourselves." So let's look at an example of a quantitative data that could come from a VISTA project. In looking at the data in the first section, here's a quick chat question for you. What question comes to mind, or what information would be helpful to know so that you better understand these data? You can see we list quarters 1, 2, and 3. And as you're looking at this through either you or someone at your VISTA project who put these simple informational statistics together to really show another audience what information is going on. And before you send this data out to constituents or board members, etc., you want to think for yourself what your audience may wonder about these data, and if that's something that's critical to include. So I see a couple of comments coming in. One question was, how many hours did they serve? What did they do as a volunteer? Why did quarter 3 have significantly less volunteers? Did they continue to volunteer? See, these are great questions. These are things that you want your data to start getting in your mind about what is the information telling you and what is it not telling you. I'll say that there's still a lot of resources and ideas coming in, and there really is no wrong answer to this question. My immediate question would be similar to what some of you posted. If I looked at this data, I would say, why were the quarter 3 numbers so low for new volunteers compared to the first 2 quarters? Other people may ask it in a different way, how do these numbers compare to the quarters last year, to see if there are trends or anomalies? Personally, I love math and numbers, but in my opinion, just showing this quantitative data doesn't really fully tell your story, because you have a lot of gaps in wondering why are the numbers so low in quarter 3. So in this example, you may want to consider, would it be helpful for your audience to have qualitative data to supplement these quantitative data, so that they would know that quarter 1 was high because the VISTA number, they would know that quarter 1 was high because the VISTA member used new advertising channels and innovative approaches to attract volunteers. Quarter 2 was high because the VISTA member found ways to help the VISTA project better tell its story and capitalize on the sweet spot that bridged the organization's mission and the volunteers' interests. And in this example, quarter 3 was low because the community had an unfortunate economic downturn at that time, when many people lost their jobs, and a lot of volunteers who wanted to volunteer redirected their energy to finding employment to first support themselves before volunteering. So that qualitative data really supports answering the question, why is this information different? And when you display various types of statistics, just think about what else would help you to accurately and effectively tell your story. Is there additional information that could help the audience understand and define and determine what the data mean? Qualitative data also have an important purpose in you telling the story of your VISTA project. This example very briefly explains some of the experiences of the volunteers, which was likely retrieved either from in-person or phone conversations or from a volunteer evaluation. And just like quantitative data, qualitative data can be positive, negative, or neutral. You see in the volunteer quote section that there is a very positive quote, as well as a quote that includes a recommendation for improvement. All of this information is helpful to your VISTA project if you take the time to analyze the data and make a plan to do something with it. And after looking at those examples and thinking about the data that you have and will collect for your VISTA project and organization, here are some things that you will want to understand and know. Keep in mind, you don't have to be an expert at any of this. but it is essential that you consider that data can oftentimes be confusing, missing information, misinterpreted, and sometimes can cause people to assume certain things based on the way the data are presented. You can also talk with your VISTA members during meetings about your data and do exercises with them to reflect on the data that they are providing and what they think is missing or could enhance it.
Now this next slide, the image is pretty severe here, but I would actually put a softer touch on this and say, watch out for these things. There are reasons that so many people make entire careers out of data management and data analysis. And let's face it, it's not just the glamour and the fast-paced lifestyle that comes with being a data analyst. One of the things that creates a need for expertise is that there are a lot of pitfalls you have to watch out for. For example, in the realm of data integrity. Here's my rule of thumb. If it is humanly possible for someone to enter bad data, it will eventually happen, and sooner than you think. If your web form allows respondents to enter negative numbers in the field asking for their age, someone is going to tell you that they're negative 340 years old. If the contact list field doesn't require an @ symbol and a period, someone will list their email address as hot dog. The point isn't that our situation is hopeless or that the data can't be used, just that our role is to take common sense steps to drive down inaccuracy rates. If your intake form has a random field floating off near the right margin of the page, it might get missed more often than you'd like. When you do end up with a set of data that's vulnerable to potential human error, a great idea is to perform an outlier check. When dealing with numbers, a quick scatter plot in Excel can show you which items appear to be suspiciously high or low. And these are items that you should take the time to double check on with the source of the data points. An experience that probably all of us has had is to pose a question that we thought was clear, only to see it interpreted very differently by the other party. And most of the time, their interpretation of the words was just as valid as ours. This is something to be mindful of anytime you're drafting written questions. For example, a survey. This misinterpretation or other interpretation pitfall has a close cousin that is more pernicious, and it involves the incentives of the party or parties answering your question. Are they incentivized to be honest in their response or dishonest? Here's my favorite. Will an honest response result in a lot more work for them? That one in particular drives an ongoing data integrity vulnerability we have with VISTA member site data, in that an updated site address requires an amendment to the memorandum of agreement, which is a lot of work. Our role as data practitioners is to be mindful of the incentives of those sourcing our data and to point their incentives towards accurate data the best that we can. There are a number of data biases that can destroy the veracity of your conclusions, but in my experience, selection bias is the biggest offender and the one to be super careful of. Selection bias happens when a filter was applied even before we got our data in such a way that predisposed the data set to support a particular analytical conclusion. This is the bias at play when you conclude the public really favors providing free French fries in our schools before realizing that you surveyed exclusively middle schoolers. Or to take a more realistic example, it's the bias at play when you scroll through Facebook posts on a particular topic and conclude that most everyone has a really strong opinion on it. But selection bias can be really tricky. There's a subset of selection bias called attrition bias or survivorship bias. If I were to tell you that 90% of VISTAs reported having a fantastic experience in the program nationwide, a very relevant follow-up question would be, when did you survey them? If I answered, during the last week before their service term completion, that should set off alarm bells for you. Did the 20% that dropped out of the program also think it was fantastic? Their voices weren't included in the survey. You have good intentions with the information you collect and on which you report. You don't want to collect unnecessary information, and you do want to capture details that will lead you to make adjustments and produce excellent results. So be intentional about what data you collect, why you collect it, and how you intend to use it to make decisions and improvements to get you to where you want to be. No matter how much information we share with you, your ideas and experience are a very important resource. Using the chat, please answer the question, what software, tools, or resources have you found helpful to collect data, analyze data, and report data? We're talking about VISTA project-specific data here. These could be tools and resources you found to help your VISTA members to track and collect data, or it could be templates and strategies your VISTA project staff utilize to capture and analyze data in a way that makes sense to you. Please be specific so that you and others can capture ideas that may be useful for your VISTA project. Okay, I see a bunch of responses coming in. Eric, can you help me out here? They're coming so fast.
They are coming fast, and some of them I've never heard of, but these are great. Get connected, on-core reports I've heard of, member tracking. Some people use America Learns,
A lot of
Google
Google
Forms.
Forms.
Yep.
Yeah, a number of great solutions, great free solutions here I'm seeing. Did you mention Salesforce and SurveyMonkey as well? I'm seeing.
Those are great additions.
SPSS, yeah, data analysis
Qualtrics.
software. Yeah, I love it. I love these responses. We're going to have a couple more concrete software tips a little bit later in the presentation. For now, I'll say thank you, and please keep posting your ideas in the chat. As you may want to take notes and perhaps copy and paste some of the ideas you're seeing into your computer for using later. Remember that if what you are doing is not working, change it. Consider alternative ideas because you want to make your job and your VISTA members' tasks easier and effective when it comes to continually collecting data for reports in your records. And this is an iterative process where we're always getting better at it.
And as Brian said, take a look at some of the resources posted in the chat. We know that we have some ideas, you have some amazing ideas you might be able to share with each other and get some other ideas as to how other VISTA projects use different software that maybe you never thought of or have never used. And as you think about that, at this point, we're just over halfway through, and we've talked a lot about the collection of data, why it's important, in some ways how you can collect data. Now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about a related topic, of course, and that is reporting. So let's go ahead and do that now. It's pretty obvious. Reports contain data pertaining to what you are doing and specifically for your VISTA project in this case. Easily understandable, clear, and informative reports are critical and need to have accurate data, not just for CNCS, VISTA headquarters, and others, but also for your VISTA project and your organization. Let's face it, you are busy. We know that. One of the reasons why we appreciate you doing all that you do. And reporting is likely not your favorite activity, kind of like this person on the screen. It does not have to be, but also don't think of it as a chore. Really think about how you can effectively use the VISTA reports and other reports that you put together for your organization to tell the story of your VISTA project for various purposes. It could be informational, recruitment, attracting volunteers, applying for grants, etc. Kind of be excited about the data you're collecting and why it makes your organization as great as it is. And though it may be a refresher for some people, we're going to now segue in talking a little bit about the CNCS reports that the VISTA program requires. And remember that if you have questions about performance measures specifically or project-specific reporting questions, please be sure to reach out to your CNCS state or regional office.
All right. Now this is coming from somebody who works with this data on a very regular basis. I can tell you that VISTA and CNCS use the reports that you submit to us all the time, all the time. We're going to go through them here. So first, in addition to making us accountable to the public for spending living allowance dollars on members that are in service, sponsor verification forms routinely help us avoid a nightmare scenario that goes like this. And this is purely hypothetical. It's August, and we just learned that VISTA Jennifer dropped out of service in April without completing a future plans form. She's been erroneously paid VISTA living allowance by CNCS for the last 5 months, and now we are legally obligated to ask her for the money back, money she probably doesn't have anymore. Your sponsor verification forms trigger a warning to us in an internal report that this member has just exited and needs to be deactivated from service. Progress reports are used at the micro level to help CNCS regional office staff best support you with the training and assistance that you need for your VISTA project. And used also at the macro level in agency-wide data calls to quantify the work we are doing in a particular space, for example, food security. VISTA Progress Report supplement data is used constantly by VISTA in marketing materials, and reports that are used to set agency funding levels, such as the congressional budget justification sent to Congress. Also in reports to federal government task forces driving a response to a pressing national crisis, such as with the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the opioid crisis. Occasionally also, progress report data is used to identify exemplar VISTA projects. Narrative fields, especially those in the VISTA project application, are used constantly as well to help us stay abreast of the wide variety of work VISTA projects are doing, to allow us to quantify CNCS impact in a particular space, such as STEM education, and again, to identify exemplar VISTA projects in a particular space. Federal financial reports, which are for recipients of VISTA grants only, are critical in helping us ensure that money awarded remains tied to service and in helping us get new grant funds into the hands of organizations that really need it, while avoiding piling onto grantees needing more time to spend their awarded grant funds. Most of the above items are automatically compiled at the project level in a dashboard we maintain and use internally to help regional staff identify training and support needs for you, our sponsors, and to inform decisions about whether to continue a project. Now we're going to look at some examples of the way that you, our VISTA project sponsors, help us tell our story, specifically making use of the VISTA Progress Report supplement data. And so you can see on this slide, items number 3 and number 4 here come directly from the VISTA Progress Report supplement report that we conduct annually, and which sponsors will fill out once a year shortly after the conclusion of the fiscal year, which is in the waning months of the calendar year. Jumping ahead to the next slide, we take those same items 3 and 4 and they're fleshed out a little bit more with some detail here. Think about this. The data that you provide us enables us to quantify that, and these are figures from 2018, quantify that VISTA members generated $195 million in cash and in-kind resources in fiscal year 2018. That is more than double every dollar invested in the program, which is really pretty incredible. VISTA members mobilized over 720,000 volunteers who collectively volunteered more than 7.5 million hours. That is an enormous impact, and I think sometimes working at our sites, working in the community, we don't always think about how the fact that, if we have a VISTA project, we're part of an enormous nationwide network operating in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and other US territories that collectively have this massive impact. And your data reports help us tell that story. On this next slide here, we can see that the thousands of VISTA members serving in fiscal year 2018 their actions helped serve 2.4 million youth and connected 76,000 individuals with opioid programming in fiscal year 2018. Okay, we're going to jump ahead to the next slide. Here's a snapshot of the VISTA project dashboard that I mentioned briefly a few slides ago. You may have been given a PDF or a printout of this specific to your VISTA project by your CNCS program officer or portfolio manager, or perhaps at last summer's VISTA sponsored convening. We constantly rely on the data that you provide us, as well as the data that our VISTA members provide us. So I know it's sort of small here, but you can see there's a wealth of information in this dashboard, and on the left specifically, there are some boxes dedicated to reporting specifically. And I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Brian. I know there's a lot of information coming at you, and as you think about your data and what you collect for your VISTA project and organization, we're going to have a poll appear on the screen, and we want you to respond to this poll and thinking about the CNCS VISTA reports that you complete. We'll give you a few seconds to respond to the poll. And the question really is simple. With which VISTA report do you feel that you and your VISTA project need the most assistance? We'll be able to spend a little bit more time on that in today's presentation, but your answers are the sponsor verification form, the project progress report, the VISTA progress report supplement, future plans form, federal financial report, other, if there's another report you have in mind, or maybe you're new and not familiar with any of these reports. Go ahead and indicate your answer now, and you can select only one, even if you need help with multiple, but hopefully you don't need help with too many. And in a few seconds when we look at the results, we'll see what we can do and how we can assist in answering some of the questions that come up about the reports. So we'll give you another 5 seconds or so to complete the poll. It looks like a lot of people have already submitted their responses. And we'll go ahead and close now. Don't worry if you haven't submitted the poll. It's not as big of an issue. But overwhelming majority of people, I think it's 39% of the people that submitted their response, need more assistance with the project progress report, which we call the PPR, followed very closely by the federal financial report and the VISTA progress report supplement. And for those of you who said that you were new and not familiar with any of these reports, that's fine. We're going to go over all of them in a little bit of detail. We'll try to spend a little bit more time on the project progress report, try to say that 10 times fast. And hopefully that will give you the information you need to get started, and of course, follow up with your CNCS state or regional office as needed. So let's take a look at a chart that we have for you. Especially for those people that are new, here's a very quick chart that gives you a brief summary. And we know that you might already be familiar with this, but if you're not, on the top row is the name of the report. The second row lists typically when the report is due or when you need to submit the report to CNCS. And then, of course, the third row gives a very, very brief summary of each report. But I do want to point out two very, very quick important things. One, and this answers a question that came in earlier, the project progress report, which we call the PPR, used to be something that was due quarterly for newer projects, and then later it was up to the discretion of the CNCS state or regional office if they wanted to move you to semi-annually. But I'm told that recently, most VISTA projects now do report semi-annually. There are still a few that report the PPR quarterly, but most VISTA projects now report semi-annually. Again, if you have questions specifically about that, you can either access the report in eGrants, or you can follow up with your CNCS state or regional office to confirm if your project is semi-annually or quarterly. And then the second note is that the federal financial report, we have a lot of acronyms, FFR, is only required of VISTA projects that have a program or support grant. So hopefully that clears that up. But let's talk a little bit about some of these reports. So sponsor verification form, which is another acronym, but we rarely ever use the acronym SVF. As most of you know, every 2 weeks, you or whoever is designated as the person to do this will submit a sponsor verification form. It's in eGrants, which we know is your favorite and most frequently visited website. This helps CNCS track which members are still actively serving at your project so that we can make sure we prevent member overpayment and we know the status of all the members. This information also ties in directly to VISTA member payroll for standard VISTA projects that are paid, the members are paid directly by CNCS. And you can quickly see in the screenshot, we've highlighted what a sponsor verification form looks like. It lists all your members, and next to each member, there's a drop-down menu where you select the action. No action means that the member is still actively serving, but if there is a change in their status, you would select it from the drop-down menu and save it. Two other quick things I'll mention. One is obviously if there's a change in a member status, if they early terminate or leave or something happens, don't let the sponsor verification form be the only way that you notify CNCS. Definitely send an email or call your CNCS state or regional office so that they get the notification immediately as well. And also, on this report, you will want to set reminders, because if you're going to be out of the office or if you know that it's coming up but you forget, there is a reminder that's sent out, but it's critical that you complete this report. This function has to be completed by a staff member, so please do not delegate it to another AmeriCorps member, an intern, or a volunteer. It must be done by a staff member. So next we'll briefly talk about the future plans form. And again, if you have questions, please keep them coming in the chat. Brian and I will have time to answer some of them as we get closer to the end. You might be familiar with the future plans form, or FPF. Every member has to complete it, and every supervisor also has to complete it as well. So what you see on the screen is Part A. The Future Plans form itself will automatically unlock for the VISTA member in their my.americorps.gov account 90 days prior to their end of service. And the images you see on the screen make up Part A of the Future Plans form, which is the part that the VISTA member completes. A critical piece of information it asks them is if they plan to end their service as scheduled, request to extend their service for less than 1 year, terminate service early, etc. But the member fills out this part. Now we'll show you the highlighted part on the screen is Part B of the Future Plans form, and this is critical because this is what you, the VISTA supervisor, completes and submits. The member does Part A, you do Part B. And you should make sure to coordinate with the VISTA member supervisor if you do not directly supervise this individual. This section, Part B, evaluates the member's service. At the top of the screen, you enter the VISTA member's major duties and accomplishments, which you probably get from the VAD and other meetings you have with the member. Then, in the next part of Part B, you rank the VISTA member in 7 categories, indicating each category as either poor, adequate, above average, or excellent. And then finally, in Part B, you select your final recommendation for the member to either re-enroll, extend, terminate service, or defer service. Please note that the member then has the opportunity to review your comments. So one really good suggestion and best practice, we know a lot of people like those, is for you to host an exit interview so that the member is aware of what you're entering for their review. This also helps you get more data, once again talking about data, about how you can help this member transition out of VISTA service and what you may be able to do to improve for your next VISTA if you will have more. Once those 2 sections are complete, it then goes to the CNCS state or regional office for review, and they complete Part C. So let's talk a little bit about the Project Progress Report, or PPR, which I know there are a couple of questions about. So another report that's required is the Project Progress Report. And again, just as a reminder, most VISTA projects now only have to fill out this report semi-annually or twice a year. But again, just as a reminder, make sure you check with your CNCS state or regional office just to find out if you're one of the few projects that's still reporting quarterly, because it's important to know when the due dates are and what's required of you. As Brian mentioned earlier, the progress report information is part of your project's official record, and it'll be used to evaluate a project's continuation. If you have questions on what you should include, I'll definitely refer you to the PPR instructions that are located in the helpful links handout that you saw a link to earlier in the chat. The project progress report is essential because whether quarterly or most projects semi-annually, it really does assess a project's progress and success, but it also helps the CNCS state and regional office as well as VISTA headquarters understand where there might be difficulties, challenges, or information that's needed to assist the project. If you are a project with multiple sites, you will need to establish a way to aggregate information about members serving at their sites, since typically there's only 1 or 2 people at a project that might actually submit the reports to CNCS, but you would need to gather that data from your other projects to make sure you can collect it all together. And then don't wait until your progress report is due to ask a question or to share a member's impact. We really encourage you to share information with your CNCS state or regional office as it happens. We know that way our CNCS state or regional offices can help you share your successes and coach you through your challenges as they come. And before we continue on to the next report, I do want to answer another question that came in about the progress report. And that was, how do I find it and how do I access it? So as a sponsor, as a supervisor, all of the reports that you do are in eGrants. So of course you'd access eGrants. You should on your homepage see a couple of different links, but you'll see usually in the right side of the screen, links to the active reports that you have. If you have a report that's not yet due, it may not show up yet in eGrants, but plenty of time before it's due, you'll have access to see that link for the project progress report, of course, for the other reports that you have in eGrants as well. And again, if you don't see the report and you know it's due, or if there's some issue, excuse me, first communicate with your CNCS state and regional office just to make sure that they have you in the system correctly, that your account in eGrants is correct, and then they can they can take it from there. So let's go on to talk about the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, the VPRS. Very briefly, this is an annual report and it tracks demographic information for your project. On the screen, you see all of the questions that your VISTA project will need to answer. And as you can see, it's really good to know ahead of time on what you will need to report for the VPRS so that you can track it. It helps to know that in advance. If your VISTA project does not address a specific item, let's say your VISTA project doesn't do anything with opioid program, then you would just enter the number 0 for that specific line item. This report typically is due late in the calendar year, and it's based on our, CNCS's, fiscal year, which is October 1st of one year through September 30th of the next. This means that you will likely have to track information with your members on a monthly basis to accurately submit this report. It's a relatively easy report, but again, it helps that if you're tracking it on a regular basis so that you don't have to wait until it's due to try to put all of it together. We'll continue with the FFR and then we'll, in a minute, get to more questions. So very briefly, as we mentioned, the FFR, the Field Financial Report, is a report that's only required if you have a program or support grant. Make sure that you connect with your CNCS state or regional office for more information on what specifically is required of your grant, because all grants are not the same. And you may want to also loop in the fiscal staff at your organization as appropriate. If you do not have a program or support grant, you don't need to worry about this report. One other quick note, if you have a cost share agreement, and if you do have a cost share agreement, you would know what that is, and we can explain that a little bit later. Cost share invoices are payable upon receipt. You will receive them either on a bi-weekly or a monthly basis in e-grants, depending on your agreement. To help share some ideas with your peers, we've asked you to respond to this question in the chat. And this question is mostly for you. It's helpful for us, but we really want you to think about what tips do you have for preparing VISTA reports? For those of you that have done this before and have best practices, tips, great suggestions, share those with your colleagues on this call now, because everything that all of this is providing can really make a difference. We want to hear what your ideas are, what your suggestions are, and how we as VISTA headquarters and CNCS can consider putting together resources and information to assist VISTA projects out there. So go ahead and type your tips and tricks and suggestions into the chat as we continue, and we'll come back to those in a few minutes. So I'll turn it over to Brian to talk about a couple of tips that we have for you in terms of reporting tips.
Thank you, Eric. All right. Some of these may seem like common sense to you, but they bear repeating anyway. So here are some additional tips. First, we recommend you and your VISTA members start tracking data early so you don't have to rush at the end. Help VISTAs understand that some of the data may help them in their personal and professional lives as they think about their resume and career. So start early. That's one. 2, document member activities carefully. For example, if a member wants to re-enroll or extend their service, then you should document how they've successfully supported your project and accomplished activities on their VAD or VISTA assignment description, and rate the VISTA member accordingly. This will help the CNCS state or regional office evaluate your VISTA project. And third, if you are an intermediary or sub-site project, think about how often you want the sites to report to the intermediary and how often do you want the intermediary to have to review information. Have that conversation with your sites and work together in a proactive manner. You can find more information and ideas on the VISTA campus website. Don't forget to use the search field if desired. Speaking of the VISTA campus, let's talk about a few resources, and then we will, at that point, ask you to complete a short evaluation, and we will start answering some of your questions that are coming in. Remember that the VISTA campus is your friend. Get to know it, love it, and it will love you. Search for resources on the topic of your interest in the helpful links document that you have access to in the chat. There are links to many resources on reporting. The helpful links handout, which you can download using the link in the chat, has many links to help you understand and complete the required CNCS VISTA reports. So especially if you're new to VISTA project and new to CNCS reporting, definitely check out that link in the chat. It's got also some related information as you think about collecting your data.
So before we get to a couple of the really good questions that came in that might be generalizable and good for everyone to hear, we do want to ask you to fill out an evaluation. I know it only takes 3 or 4 minutes on average, but we greatly appreciate your feedback, not just about this session, but there's also a question that asks for a suggestion for future webinars. So please take a minute while we're doing the Q&A or soon thereafter to put in your honest thoughts and feedback about the presentation so we can look forward to improving it in the future. We greatly appreciate it. And then we also want to point your attention to, if you're interested in learning more about the VISTA member benefits, we know that VISTA members have information about it, but we also get a lot of questions from supervisors who want to know the details and how they work and what they have access to. We have a webinar on Tuesday, September 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern, called the Supervisor Circle, VISTA member benefits. You can click on the link in the chat or go to the VISTA members webinars page to access the registration. We look forward to providing you more detail about how the VISTA member benefits work, another mouthful, and how we can assist you as supervisors. So let's really quickly talk about some of there were 4 really critical questions that came in before the presentation, which will start our Q&A. And one of the questions was, as you see on the screen, how can we motivate VISTA members to give us accurate and detailed reports on their work? So one of our data experts who's in VISTA in CNCS headquarters, he's another data analyst just like Brian. He knows a lot of stuff. One of his suggestions, first, he mentions, first you want to communicate effectively with your members. It's important to know how the data will help them tell their story and get them to see what's in it for me. Next, consider creating a fun competition. It's not about who wins or loses, but to get them excited about encouraging on-time reporting or who can be the most effective at reporting. And then you also might want to have them explore other incentives, even small ones. They don't have to be monetary, but incentives that get VISTA members excited and encourage them to prioritize quality reporting and data collection. Another question that came in was, what are some tips for coordinating data collection with sub-site partners? Well, no surprise that strong communication is up there, as you want to let your sub-sites know what information you need and why you need it. Providing them training is critical, either training that you develop or training that already exists. Next, when you meet with them, check their assumptions about what data are needed and the method in which you collect data. If you don't do training and explain the details, how are they going to know what to do? You'll likely have a lot of confusion. Then review the data your sites provide and give them feedback on if the data is accurate, if it's quality, if it's what you want. That makes a big deal. And then finally on this question, make it a two-way conversation and ask what other data your subsets collect to see if you can find a way to make the process easier for collecting all of these data.
Here's another question that came in from you all. What types of free databases are suggested for data collection besides Excel? And we saw a lot of great suggestions earlier in the chat on the same topic, but you know, our colleague, the Chief Program Office data lead, mentioned that he really recommends taking a look at Airtable. He said a couple of years ago he would have recommended Microsoft Access for databasing, but he says Airtable is a great product, and he likes their free basic services enough to recommend it. But you can also, if you want to sign up for a paid account, you can get access to more complex services to collect and analyze data. He also mentioned a couple other options to check out for database work, including MySQL or MySQL and PostgreSQL or Postgres. Don't forget to continue to share your software resources and ideas in the chat, including potential links to that software to share with your peers. This next more general question was also very common, which is, what are best practices? Are there any platforms or ways to collect or report data that are best? So certainly you can search the internet for a wealth of resources specific to your needs. Be particular and be careful about how you phrase questions so you don't accidentally cause confusion, lead the audience to assume something, or misrepresent the data. Next, recognize that there are likely errors in your process or biases possible at every stage of the data lifecycle. So do what you can to mitigate them and have other people check your work. Next, though not endorsed nor supported by CNCS nor the VISTA program, Coursera, and there are some other companies as well, they've got some free online courses to assist in this effort.
So a lot of questions came in. Brian, one of the first questions I'll defer to you, and that was when we were talking about the project dashboard. Someone was asking, is there a way or how do they get access to their project dashboard? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. So that definitely, I encourage you to reach out to your state or regional office, who is your contact for anything specific to your project. So that is, for those that don't know, those that may be new, that's your state code at cns.gov. So if you're in Illinois, that's il@cns.gov. So just send them an email and ask them about the project dashboard, VISTA project dashboard that you saw on today's webinar, and they should be able to direct you to that resource or send you that resource.
Great, thank you. Another question was from a few people. They need specific training on reports and wondering how to get that. So it's not all specific training. Some of it's resources, some of it's tutorials, and some of it's instructions. But if you first take a look at the helpful links handout that you had access to, and the link is still in the chat, that will give you links to instructions on basically all the reports we mentioned. There's more detail on there, not just instructions, some of it's tutorials. I would say if you have additional questions after that about not just how to do the report, but the purpose of it, certainly look at the report in eGrants to familiarize yourself with it before you reach out to your CNCS state and regional office, just so that at least you have the framework around what specifically your questions are and how they can help you. And that kind of goes into another question that also relates to the CNCS state and regional office. As we were talking about the field financial report, and someone was asking, how do we get a program or support grant? Some of these questions like that do need to first go to your CNCS state and regional office, since they manage the VISTA project from the field level. So if you're not sure if you have a program or support grant, or if you think you might want one, please reach out to your program officer or portfolio manager, and they'll be able to tell you if that's possible and how long that process takes. So let's see, a couple of other questions that came in. I see how often is it completed. I'm not sure what report that is, but as a reminder, the sponsor verification form is submitted every 2 weeks, no exceptions, every 2 weeks. There was a question about what happens if it's late. I'll answer that by saying, don't be late. You really don't want your sponsor verification form to be late, because even though the CNCS as a whole does track the reports and when they come in, it's critical that they be submitted on time. That's why it's good that you add a calendar reminder to your calendar, and if you're going to be out of the office, designate someone else to do that. But Brian, before I quickly go to the next question, let me stop and see if you had any other answers to those questions I just provided.
Yeah, I'll just add that you covered this before, Eric, but the progress report is submitted on a semi-annual basis, and that's tied not to the calendar year nor fiscal year, but to your specific project schedule. So one tip for knowing if you have a report due is that you'll see it assigned to you in eGrants. You'll see that to-do item in eGrants. The VISTA progress report supplement, again, comes shortly before the end of the calendar year. And typically, if you're a newer project that didn't have any members on board yet in the fiscal year that just completed, typically CNCS will disable your report in that situation. And if not, your responses would just be zeros anyway, not having members yet.
Great. In the short time we have left, I'll try to answer 2. Maybe I can squeeze in 3 questions, and we'll see if I can follow up to a few others later. So really quickly, do members get notified when their future plans form is unlocked? Yes. The My AmeriCorps system sends them an automatic email as soon as it's unlocked, letting them know about that, but it is 90 days before their scheduled end of service date that they get their future plans form unlocked. And a couple more questions about the FPF. Why does it get sent back to the sponsor? It's possible there's a glitch. Again, the member does Part A, then it goes to you as the sponsor for Part B. The member has a chance to review your comments, but then it goes to Part C, which is the CNCS State or Regional Office. It shouldn't necessarily go back to the sponsor if there were no changes or issues, but Brian, do you have any other comments you want to add on the future plans form?
No, I don't think I can be helpful any more than that you've already said, Eric, to
I'll
that.
say if it does happen a lot, definitely check either with your CNCS State Regional Office or reach out to the VISTA Member Support Unit just to find out if there's something else you're missing, or maybe you accidentally submitted it and forgot to fill in information, just to make sure that it is actually done correctly.
Eric, there's this question coming in about VISTA members and what reporting requirements they have. Like, what reports are they supposed to fill out specifically? And I know you are definitely the future plans form. They play a big role in that one, and you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else comes to mind? I know the training unit does some work with surveys.
Yes, other than the future plans form, officially there's not any other report that VISTA headquarters requires VISTA members to fill out. There are often times where, because sponsors have to fill out the CNCS reports, sponsors may give a version of that report to the VISTA so the VISTA can track things and aggregate it up to the sponsor level. But there's no official other report that has to be done by VISTAs. We just recommend that you work with your VISTAs to let them know what information you need for the reports, and of course, make sure they complete their future plans form. So what we'll do now, I know there's a few more questions coming in. Some of these I'll respond to in the next few minutes in the chat, but I do want to keep in mind the time. So in the last two slides, we want to remind you that in looking at the goals for today's session, we looked at how to reflect on the importance of collecting accurate data for your VISTA project. We showed you a little bit of the ways to make use of the data you collect, and from what we mentioned, as well as what other supervisors and sponsors mentioned on this webinar. And we talked a little bit about the difference between and the information collected in the VISTA reports. So finally, I want to thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I really want to give a huge shout out to Brian Mitterer, the VISTA data analyst, for helping me with this webinar. I want to thank Ben Ballerstein and Kelly Daly for sharing information and content. Thank you to Barbara Reynolds for always providing her support on the webinar. And of course, thank our partners at LSI, Mike and Kim, for everything they've done to manage the technology. So I'll be on for a few minutes answering questions in the chat, but thank you very much. And from all of us here at VISTA and CNCS, thank you for being a VISTA supervisor, and have a great day.